Today's recipe calls for ice water. I'm going to show you how to make a super easy pie crust that is really buttery and super flaky. So with that said, let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is measure out all of our dry ingredients for our pie crust. Whenever you're baking, you always need a spoon and level your flour or all of your dry ingredients, like so. This way you'll get the exact amount of flour that you need, because baking is more of a science compared to cooking. So this is the best method to use besides weighing out your dry ingredients. So spoon your flour into your measuring device and grab a knife to level it off. We're going to need 2 1/2 cups of all-purpose flour. So you're going to do the same exact method for all of your flour. Once you have it spooned and leveled, go ahead and throw it in a medium-sized mixing bowl. The next thing we're going to add to our bowl is 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt. And you're going to grab your whisk and lightly whisk your face off to bring all of your dry ingredients together. The next thing we're going to add to our bowl is 1 cup of very cold unsalted butter to our bowl. I added about half and cut that in before I added the rest. And you can cut it in with your little fingies, but it's pretty tough, and honestly I'm not that strong. So I ended up grabbing the brass knuckles of the pastry world, also known as a pastry cutter. If you don't have one, you can also use a fork. Using a fork or a pastry cutter will help keep the butter cold so that we get the best result in the end. And I find it a lot easier that my butter was cut into 1/4-inch cubes. It was a lot easier to cut it in with the flour than using large chunks of butter. And I cut my butter the night before I made the pie crust. This way it let it harden up overnight again and get really cold. So keep cutting all your butter in until everything is well cut in and there's no large butter chunks. In the end, you should end up with small little pieces of butter that are about anywhere from lima bean to almond size or even pea size. If you're using a pastry cutter or a fork to cut in your butter, ensure that you occasionally stop and clean off your tool, because the flour and butter will start to gum up on it and it will inhibit us from cutting in the rest of our butter. In the end, this is what your mixture should look like, almost like a finely grated Parmesan cheese, but it should also have large chunks of butter still throughout it. So once you have it like this, go ahead and set it aside so we can move on to the next step when the real action starts to happen. The next thing we're going to start adding to our bowl is ice water, a tablespoon at a time. In the end, you may end up adding anywhere from 5 tablespoons to maybe 8 tablespoons. It all depends on where you live, how dry it is, or how humid it is. And once you have your water to your bowl, you're going to grab a fork and you're going to mix that in really well until your flour starts to get slightly hydrated. And it's best to add little bits of water at a time, because you don't want to overdo it on the water. And it's important to use ice water. This way, cold water will help keep our butter from melting. You can use a fork to mix your water in. It'll be a lot cleaner, but I just hate using it. I find it a lot easier to start using my ball catchers. After the first set of 3 tablespoons of water has been mixed in really well, I'm going to add a few more tablespoons of water and give that a thorough mix together. In the end, you should end up with a fairly shaggy dough that's slightly hydrated and kind of crumbly, but sticks together when you squeeze it in your hand. The best way to tell if you need to keep adding more water or not is add a tablespoon, mix it really well, and stop and squeeze your mixture together to see if it'll hold. And if it doesn't, then of course it's too dry and you need to add more ice water. And if it sticks together really well and clumps up and makes a nice ball in your hand, then you know it's done. In the end, I think I added about 6 or 7 tablespoons of ice water to our mixing bowl. You may need more or less. Like I said before, it all depends on where you live, and it's one of those visual things instead of an actual measurement. So use the method of mixing in your water really well and then clumping it together to see if it'll stick. And it seems super scary, but it's not. If you keep practicing making pie crust, it'll get a lot easier for you. And you want to slightly knead your dough together. You don't want to overmix it. Overmixing our pie dough will activate the gluten and it'll prevent us from getting a nice flaky crust. So in the end, it should look something roughly like this. Now that you have your pie dough made, grab yourself a good sized piece of saran wrap and throw it down on your work surface. You're going to pour your pie dough right in the center of it and start to slightly knead your pie dough once again. And you can use your saran wrap to fold over the sides from each angle to help bring your pie dough together. If your pie dough is really crumbly, don't worry, that's normal and that's totally fine. You're going to do your best to start to shape it in your saran wrap into a circle. This will make it a lot easier to roll out later. So keep folding it until everything starts to become one giant shape of dough. It doesn't have to be perfect, so don't worry. And using saran wrap will help keep it airtight so our pie dough doesn't dry out when we throw it in the fridge. And like a true novice, I made mine into a square instead of a circle because we all know I don't know shapes apparently, but in the end it'll be fine. So once you have it nice and shaped and formed and wrapped really tight, go ahead and grab it and let's throw it in the fridge. Alright, now that we have our pie crust made, we're going to let it chill in the fridge for an hour. This will let the dough completely hydrate and lets the gluten rest, so it'll be easier to roll out later. So we're going to let it take a little quick nap, and then we should probably take a nap too. We'll see you in a few. Alright, now that our dough is rested for an hour, let's roll it out. Now that our dough has taken a little nappy nap, we're going to start to roll it out. So grab yourself some extra flour and flour your work surface really well to help prevent the dough from sticking to your work surface when we roll it out. Then you also want to dust your rolling pin as well with flour. This will also help prevent it from sticking. Before you roll your dough out, you want to let it hang out at room temperature for a few minutes. This way it'll be easier to roll out and won't crack and break on you when you try to roll it out. Once you have it on your work surface, grab your rolling pin and start to smash it out slightly. This will make it easier to roll out. So smash one side, give it a quarter turn, and smash it again. Once you have it slightly smashed out, you're going to start rolling your dough out. You want to roll your dough to about a 1/4 inch thick, and you want to apply equal pressure when you roll your dough out from end to end or side to side. This way it'll help ensure that your dough stays even when you roll it out. You want to roll your dough one way and give it a 1/4 turn and roll it the other way. You want to keep doing the 1/4 turn and roll. This will help keep it uniform and make it into a circle, which will fit our pie pan perfectly. If your pie dough starts to crack and come apart on the edges, feel free to stop and pinch your dough back together. Once you have your dough pinched back together, go ahead and start rolling out your dough again. Best to take care of the cracks right away. This way they don't become any bigger when you keep rolling your dough out. And it's kind of hard to tell from this angle, but there's nice streaks of butter throughout our dough, and that's what you're going for. This will help ensure that your entire dough is nice and buttery and delicious, and it will also help in the baking process. So when we go to bake our pie dough in a hot oven, steam will be released from our butter that's melted, which in turn will create layers in our pie crust and will also make our pie crust super flaky and delicious. That's why it's really important to use chilled butter at the beginning. This way it'll stay together and hold shape when you add it to your flour and roll it out later. And it's also important to keep your dough chilled for the same reason. It won't melt once it's in that dough ball. So keep rolling it out until it's about a 1/4 inch thick and it's big enough to fit your pie pan. Then if your pie dough's anything like mine and starts to slightly stick to your work surface, all you need to do is very carefully lift up your pie dough and sprinkle your work surface with a little bit more flour. Now that your pie dough looks white enough, grab your pie pan and lay it face down onto your pie dough. This will help ensure that you rolled out your dough large enough to fit your pie pan. And it is a bit of a pain to pick it back up without ruining your pie dough. So if you do get a little marks or anything in your pie dough, all you need to do is re-roll it out and smooth it again. And the best method to transfer over your pie dough to your pie pan is to start on one side of your dough and start to roll your rolling pin up into your dough like so, almost like a rug. This makes it a lot easier and safer to transfer over your pie dough to your pie pan. Then roll it out the opposite way to get your rolling pin out of your dough. And you want to lift up your pie dough to ensure that it completely settles inside of your pan. So lift up the edges and slightly push in your pie dough into the rounded edges of your pan. This will help ensure that it takes the complete shape and form of your pan. Now that you have your pie dough in your pie pan, you're going to grab a pair of kitchen shears and cut off the excess pie dough. You can also use a knife for this, but shears make it so much easier. And you want to leave a small amount of excess pie dough on around your pie pan. This will help ensure that we have enough to make a nice crimped edge for our pie. So when you're rolling out your pie dough, it's really important that everything is the exact same thickness. I made the mistake and my edges of my pie dough were a bit too thick and they didn't match the center thickness. So ensure that the edges of your pie dough is the same thickness as the center of your pie dough. This made it a lot harder to crimp later, but in the end it's fine. It's just learn from my mistake so you don't deal with the the same problem. And you can make a super thick edge on your pie crust by folding in a bit of the excess pie crust into itself and then crimping it later on. Or you can keep it simple and just crimp your edges without folding in any of the excess pie dough into itself. And I forgot to mention earlier, it's best to give yourself a decent amount of edge so that you can crimp your pie crust, because when it goes to bake, it's going to shrink in the oven. So if you didn't give yourself enough edge on your pie pan with your pie dough, it's going to start to shrivel and shrink, and you might end up with a nice high edge on one side and a real short edge on the other side. Now that you have all of your excess dough folded into itself, if you went that route, we're going to start crimping the edges of our pie dough. So there's two methods for this. You can make the little peace sign, making it wide, and use your other index finger to push the dough in between your two fingers to make that little crimped edge. Or you can grab the pie dough with your two index fingers and use both of your thumbs to push the dough in between your two index fingers to make that little crowned edge on your pie dough. Either or works really well. I find using the two thumbs a lot easier and faster, but it's really up to you. And you want to keep your crimped edges fairly close together so we get that nice aesthetic look. So just keep crimping your edges and rotating your pan until you meet up with the other side that has already been crimped. And it should end up looking something roughly like this. Now would be the perfect time to fill it and bake it if you're making a filled pie. But today I'm going to show you how to blind bake your pie crust. This way you can do like a no-bake pie. So if you're going that route, grab a piece of saran wrap, cover it up so we can throw it in the fridge. And here's a bit of a closer look on how to crimp your pie crust edge. It's kind of hard doing this floating in the air, but pinch it with your two index fingers and push through with your thumb. Now that we got our pie crust in our pan, we're going to let it rest in the fridge for 30 minutes. This will let the gluten completely rest and let the dough firm up a bit so it doesn't shrink too much in the oven. So yeah, let's take another break. See you in a few. Now that our pie dough is resting, we're going to preheat our oven to 425 so we can blind bake it. Now that our pie dough is chilling and our oven is preheating, you're going to grab yourself a piece of parchment paper and fold it from side to side, or also known as horizontally, or like they told us in elementary school, the hot dog fold. Now crimp the edges to make it nice and crisp fold. Then you're going to fold it vertically, or also known as the hamburger fold, as they told us in elementary school. And you're going to flatten it out and seal the edges like we did before. And then you're going to give your square a slight quarter turn so your paper looks like a rhombus. Then you're going to start folding one corner to the opposite side. So you're going to give it a half fold, keeping that sharp corner edge, almost like you're making a paper airplane. Once you have the half turn, you're going to give it one last fold so the corners meet. In the end, we make a cone, and it should look something like this. Now that your pie dough has chilled long enough, you're going to grab it out of the fridge, and you're going to grab the cone that we just made with our parchment paper. You're going to place the tip of your cone in the center of your pie dough and cut off the excess parchment paper. You want to go with a rounded cut so it'll fit into your pan well. Then unfold it and see if you need to cut off any excess parchment paper or not. I ended up having to cut some more paper. Cutting the parchment paper into a circle for our pie pan, this will help ensure that the tinfoil doesn't stick to our pie dough when we go to bake it and not ruin all the hard work we did. So it should fit in there nice and snug with a little bit coming up on the edges of your pie dough. Now that you have your parchment paper set inside of your pie pan, you're going to grab a piece of tinfoil and start to fold it to accomplish the same goal that we did with our parchment paper. There's really no great way in folding this tinfoil so it'll fit in there. So do any which way possible that will work so it fits. I threw mine in there and started to crimp the edges. It doesn't really matter. You just want to ensure that your tinfoil fits and takes the shape of your pie dough so when it goes to bake, it doesn't rise up once we fill it with our weights. You can use pie weights if you have them. I do not have pie weights, so a great alternative if you don't have those is to use uncooked beans. All you need to do is throw enough in your pan so that they lay flat and it takes up the entire size and form of your pan, so when it goes to bake it doesn't puff up and we don't lose all the hard work that we did. Now that your pie dough is ready to go ahead and throw it in your preheated oven to bake. Next, we're going to set a timer and bake our pie crust for 15 minutes. This will allow the pie dough to start to set and bake before we do the last final steps. Now that you have your timer set and your pie dough is baking, you're going to grab a small bowl bowl and crack a large egg into it and add a small splash of water. We're making an egg wash for our pie dough. And grab a fork and whisk your face off to bring these two ingredients together. It should look something like you're about to make scrambled eggs. The egg wash will give our pie crust a nice golden brown color. Now that our timer has gone off, we'll pull our pie crust out of the oven so we can add our egg wash. Now that our pie crust is out of the oven, we're going to pull out our weights, if that's pie weights or your uncooked beans. This is kind of tricky, so be careful not to crack your pie crust. And you're going to pull out your parchment paper as well. Once you have your pie weights and your parchment paper out of the way, you're going to grab your egg wash and a brush, and you're going to get your Bob Ross on and paint your entire pie crust with the egg wash. Get the bottoms, the sides, and the edges as well. Now that you've painted your pie dough with your egg wash, you're gonna grab a fork and start to get your Jason or your Michael Myers on, or whoever you're into, and start stabbing the bottom of your pie dough. This method is called docking. This will allow the steam to be released from our pie dough and prevent it from cracking and breaking when we go to finish the baking process. So get all stabby with it. Ensure that you only stab the bottom of your pie dough. Don't try to stab the sides, just the bottom. There's not a set number of how many holes you should stab into your pie dough. Kind of got carried away with it. The more the better, I guess. Next, we're gonna tint the edges of our pie crust. You're gonna grab a piece of tinfoil and fold it like a hot dog, like we did before. And you're gonna cover your edges of your pie crust. This is called tinting. This will help prevent the crimped edges from burning when we finish the rest of the baking process. You wanna lightly press on your tinfoil. You don't wanna press it too hard. This will end up breaking the fluted edges that we worked so hard on. So ensure that everything is covered and it's gonna stay on, and we'll throw it right back into the oven to finish baking. Now that our pie dough is back in the oven and it's been docked and it's been covered with tinfoil, we're gonna bake it for an additional 15 minutes at 425. Now that our timer has gone off for our 15 minutes, we're gonna reduce our oven heat to 375 and finish the baking process. Now that we've reduced the heat on our oven, we're gonna set another timer and finish baking our pie crust for 20 more minutes, or until it becomes nice and golden brown. The 20 minutes or until it's golden brown is the perfect ideal time if you're gonna add a no-bake filling to your pie crust. But if you're gonna add filling to your pie crust and then bake it additional or more time, you'll go like the 12-minute route. So you're gonna bake your pie crust anywhere from 12 to 20 minutes depending on what type of filling you're gonna add to your pie crust. Now that our timer has gone off, we'll go ahead and pull our pie crust out of the oven. Now that it's out of the oven, we're gonna let it completely cool down. If you're doing a no-bake pie, you're gonna let your pie crust completely cool anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. This way it'll completely cool down and set up before you add your filling. In the end, this is what your blind bake pie crust should look like. We're not gonna plate it up, but I broke off a little piece so you can see how flaky it is. So the bigger the mess it makes and the more crumbs it creates, then that just means you did it right because it's super flaky and it's gonna be delicious. Alright, now that our pie crust is done, we're gonna give it the old looky-loo. We're not gonna give it the old taste-a-roo because it looks super good, and I'm just gonna stare at it the rest of the day and maybe frame it up on the wall because it looks so good. I'm kidding, but seriously, that'd be actually pretty cool. Anyways, it came out nice and golden brown, looks super buttery. There's a nice little shine to it from the egg wash that we threw on there. Then it's super flaky. I have pie crust everywhere, it's a mess, but that just means we did it right. Overall, it just came out super good. The crimp job on it on top, I could do a little bit better, but that's how it goes. And you just learn as you go. And we did it though. Alright, that's it for today's video. This recipe is really easy, and making pie crust seems super daunting and scary, but it's not. All you need is some patience and some confidence, and you can knock this thing out of the park, no problem. And then this recipe is also super versatile. You can add the sugar to make it a sweet pie crust for your favorite apple pie, or you can omit the sugar and make a savory pie crust for chicken pot pies or anything like that, like some quiche even. And with this blind bake pie crust, now all you have to do is add your favorite non-baked pie, of course, to make like a peanut butter pie or a meringue pie. So this video is like a twofer, show you how to make pie crust, and then show you how to blind bake a pie crust, and boom, there you go. That's all you need for pie crust. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna keep staring at this pie crust and try to figure out what to do with it because I didn't plan ahead because I'm a rookie. So yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Water is good. So drink more of it, okay, people? It's good for your health. And then, anything like that. And with this no bake blind cake, Alright, that's it for today's video. This recipe is really easy and there's very few ingredients to it. And it's easy. With this, and with this blind bake pie crust, now you can make your own non-baked pie. A no-bake pie. Making pie crust seems kind of scary, but it's not. It's actually really easy. Obviously you watch this, so you would know.